The alarm on Isaiah Coleman's phone vibrated softly at 4:30 a.m., long before the sun even considered rising. He did not jolt awake. He never did. Years of early mornings had trained his body to respond without complaint. He lay still for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling of his small apartment on the east side of the city, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren cutting through the darkness. Another day, another shift, another reminder of where the world believed he belonged. Isaiah rose quietly, careful not to make noise even though he lived alone. Old habits stayed longer than they should. He washed his face in cold water, studying his reflection in the mirror. A black man in his late 40s stared back at him, tall, solid, with tired eyes that had learned to observe more than they revealed. There was intelligence in those eyes, patience too, but also something heavier, the kind of caution that came from spending a lifetime being misunderstood. He dressed in his work uniform with the same precision every morning. Blue shirt, dark pants, the name badge that read, I, Coleman, Facilities Maintenance. The fabric smelled faintly of industrial soap. Clean, neutral, unremarkable. Exactly how the job wanted him to be. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. Isaiah walked to the bus stop with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not from the cold, but from instinct. A police cruiser rolled past slowly, the officer inside glancing at him for a second longer than necessary. Isaiah kept walking, eyes forward. He had learned long ago that eye contact could be read as defiance. The bus ride downtown was silent. A few other early workers sat scattered across the seats, mostly janitors, kitchen staff, night shift nurses, people who kept the city alive while others slept and who would never be thanked for it. When the courthouse finally appeared in the distance, its stone facade looming and grand, Isaiah felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The Jefferson County Courthouse looked different in the early morning. Without the crowds, without the lawyers and reporters and judges, it felt almost honest. The marble steps were cold beneath his boots as he unlocked the service entrance and stepped inside. The smell of polish and old paper filled the air. At 5:12 a.m., Isaiah began his rounds. He pushed his cleaning cart down the long hallway, the wheels squeaking softly despite his efforts to oil them. His reflection moved alongside him in the polished marble floors, distorted, stretched, easy to ignore. He cleaned offices where framed diplomas covered the walls, where photos of smiling families sat on heavy oak desks. He wiped fingerprints from glass doors that read Justice, Equality, Law in bold engraved letters. The irony was not lost on him. As the morning wore on, the building came to life. Lawyers arrived first, speaking loudly into phones, coffee in hand. Most walked straight past Isaiah as if he were part of the furniture. Some didn't bother to hide their discomfort. A woman clutched her purse tighter as she stepped around him. A man glanced at his watch and sighed impatiently when Isaiah's cart blocked the hallway for half a second. Then there were the comments. "Hey, you missed a spot," a young attorney said once, smirking as he pointed to an already spotless floor. Another laughed and added, "Guess that's why they keep you guys on nights, huh?" Isaiah said nothing. He never did, not because he didn't understand the insult, not because he lacked the words, but because experience had taught him that speaking often came with consequences, and silence, at least, allowed him to keep his job. By mid-morning, the courtroom doors opened. Isaiah stood near the back, wiping down benches as people filed in for the day's trial. He listened without appearing to listen. He always did. Years of being overlooked had sharpened his awareness. He heard names, charges, whispers of opinion disguised as fact. When the defendant walked in, well-dressed, confident, white, Isaiah noticed how differently the room breathed. When the victim's family entered, black, quiet, grieving, the air grew heavier, more judgmental. No one noticed Isaiah noticing, and that was the truth of his life. He saw everything, while the world saw nothing of him. As the judge called the court to order, Isaiah stepped back into the shadows near the door, mop in hand, eyes steady. Another day in a building that spoke endlessly of justice while quietly deciding who deserved it. And in that moment, no one in the room could have imagined that the quiet janitor they barely acknowledged would soon become the one voice they could not ignore. By the time Isaiah returned to the courthouse the next morning, the building felt different. He could sense it before he even stepped inside. The air was heavier, charged with anticipation and tension, like the moment just before a storm breaks. The State versus Daniel Whitmore trial had reached the phase everyone was waiting for, and the entire city seemed to be holding its breath. Isaiah pushed his cart through the service entrance and followed his usual route, but the silence he preferred was gone. Voices echoed off the marble walls, excited, confident, impatient. Reporters clustered near the front steps outside, their cameras already set up, their conversations sharp and animated. Inside, lawyers walked faster than usual, shoes clicking aggressively against the floors, ties adjusted, expressions rehearsed. This was not just another case. This was a story America already thought it understood. Isaiah cleaned the courtroom early, before anyone else arrived. He wiped down the witness stands slowly, carefully, as if the wood itself deserved respect. He polished the railing separating the jury from the rest of the room. He straightened chairs that would soon be filled with people deciding another man's fate. He paused for a moment near the defense table. Daniel Whitmore's nameplate sat neatly in front of the seat. Isaiah studied it without emotion. Whitmore was younger than him, mid-30s maybe, clean-cut, confident in the way men often were when life had protected them. Isaiah had seen him before, on the news, in photos surrounded by attorneys, a man who looked like he belonged in rooms like this. Isaiah moved on, pushing his cart toward the back wall just as the doors opened and people began to file in. Marcus Reed's family entered quietly. Isaiah noticed them immediately. A black mother dressed in dark colours, her posture stiff, her face frozen somewhere between grief and restraint. A sister walking beside her, eyes red but dry, jaw clenched as if crying had become too expensive. They sat together in the gallery, hands clasped tightly, not speaking. No one greeted them. A few rows away, Whitmore's family arrived, laughing softly, whispering reassurances. Someone patted Daniel on the shoulder. A lawyer leaned down and murmured something that made him smile. Isaiah watched all of it while pretending not to exist. As testimony began, Isaiah worked the edges of the room, emptying trash, adjusting chairs, cleaning smudges that no one else seemed to notice. He listened. He listened as the defense described Marcus Reed. Agitated, confrontational, physically imposing. Isaiah felt his jaw tighten. They spoke as if Marcus were an idea, not a person. As if his death were inevitable, justified by the shape of his body and the colour of his skin. A surveillance video was shown, grainy, distant, incomplete. The defense pointed out shadows, pauses, moments of ambiguity. "This is where my client feared for his life," the attorney said confidently. Isaiah stared at the screen. He had seen that moment in real life. He knew what fear looked like, and that wasn't it. As the court recessed for lunch, Isaiah wheeled his cart into the hallway near the jury room. He kept his head down, focused on the floor, when voices drifted toward him. "They're really trying to make him look innocent," a juror said. "Well, you know how these things go," another replied. "Self-defense. Happens all the time." They laughed lightly, as if discussing the weather. Isaiah's hands tightened around the mop handle, but he didn't look up. Later that afternoon, a witness testified, someone who claimed Marcus had been out of control. The defense nodded approvingly. The jury leaned forward, attentive. Isaiah noticed the lack of hesitation, the ease with which the story was accepted. No one questioned why the witness hadn't intervened. No one asked why Marcus was assumed guilty without proof. When court adjourned for the day, the room emptied slowly. Papers were left behind, coffee cups, notes scribbled in margins. Isaiah cleaned it all, piece by piece, the the way he always did. But that night, something felt different. As Isaiah wiped down the witness stand again, his reflection stared back at him in the polished wood. He remembered standing across the street from the bar on the night of the shooting. He remembered the sound, sharp, final. He remembered Marcus stepping backward, hands open, confusion written across his face. Isaiah had been there. He had seen the truth clearly, without a camera angle, without a narrative attached. And as he turned off the lights and locked the courtroom doors, a question followed him down the empty hallway, louder than any insult he had ever swallowed. How long could justice survive if the people who saw the truth were never asked to speak? The third day of the trial arrived with a grey sky hanging low over the city, the kind of morning that felt heavy before anything had even happened. Isaiah noticed it as soon as he stepped off the bus. The air was damp, cold, and restless, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his chest felt tighter than usual as he walked toward the courthouse. Inside, everything moved faster. Phones rang more sharply, voices were louder, laughter came easier, and sounded uglier. The trial had entered the stage where opinions were no longer whispered. They were being formed, hardened, shared. Isaiah went about his work as he always did. He cleaned offices, emptied trash, wiped down surfaces that would be touched by people who believed their hands were clean simply because their lives were comfortable. He kept his head down, but his ears were open. They always were. Near mid-morning, he was assigned to the hallway outside the jury deliberation room. It was a narrow corridor with beige walls and no windows, the kind of place where sound travelled easily. Isaiah mopped slowly, deliberately, making sure not to disturb anyone. The door to the jury room was closed, but voices leaked through when someone stepped out for water or a restroom break. 2 jurors exited together. They didn't see Isaiah at first, or maybe they did, but their minds had already decided he didn't count. "Honestly," one of them said, lowering his voice only slightly, "I don't see why this is even complicated." The other snorted. "Me neither. You could tell what kind of guy he was." Isaiah felt his hands still. "What kind?" the first juror asked. The second shrugged. "You know, aggressive, dangerous. The type that ends up like that sooner or later." They laughed quietly. The sound didn't echo. It sank. Isaiah stared at the floor as if it required his full attention. The mop water rippled faintly. His reflection wavered and bent, distorted by the movement, just like the truth was being bent in the room behind that door. One of the jurors glanced down at him then. Their eyes met for half a second. There was no embarrassment, no apology, just indifference. They walked away. Isaiah remained where he was, his grip tightening on the handle until his knuckles ached. He had heard comments like that his entire life, on buses, in stores, at work, at traffic stops, always said casually, always protected by the assumption that no consequences would follow. But this time was different. This time, those words weren't just ugly opinions. They were shaping a verdict. The rest of the day passed in a blur. More testimony, more carefully chosen language, more subtle cues about who deserved sympathy and who did not. Isaiah worked around the courtroom, barely aware of his own movements. His mind kept replaying that night outside the bar, the cold air, the sudden noise, the way everything had stopped for one terrible second. He had seen Marcus Reed clearly under the streetlight. He remembered the confusion on his face, the way his hands were open, palms visible, the unmistakable step backward. Isaiah had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to read danger quickly. He knew fear, he knew aggression, and he knew when someone was being painted as a threat simply because it was convenient. When court finally adjourned, Isaiah stayed behind as usual. The building emptied out slowly, the echoes of footsteps fading until there was nothing left but silence and the hum of fluorescent lights. He cleaned the jury box last, wiping down each seat carefully, methodically, as if the act itself could scrub away what he had heard. But it couldn't. That evening, in his apartment, Isaiah sat alone at his small kitchen table. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't eat right away. He just sat there, hands folded, staring at a faded photograph taped to the refrigerator. It was of his son, taken years ago, smiling, young, alive. Isaiah thought about how easily Marcus Reed had been reduced to a stereotype in that courtroom. How quickly a life had been summarized by fear and prejudice. How casually jurors spoke when they believed no one important was listening. And for the first time in a very long time, Isaiah felt something shift inside him. Silence had protected him. It had kept him employed, it had kept him unnoticed, but silence had also allowed lies to grow teeth. As he finally stood and turned off the kitchen light, one thought stayed with him, steady and unrelenting. If he stayed quiet now, he would be part of the injustice he had spent his whole life cleaning up after. Isaiah did not sleep much that night. He lay in bed staring at the dark, listening to the ticking of the old clock on his wall, every second loud enough to feel like an accusation. His body was tired, but his mind refused to rest. The hallway, the jurors' laughter, Marcus Reed stepping backward. Over and over again, the memories replayed themselves, sharper each time. By morning, Isaiah had made a decision. It wasn't dramatic. There was no speech in the mirror, no sudden surge of courage that erased decades of caution. It was quieter than that, heavier. The kind of decision that settles into your bones and lets you know there's no turning back. When he arrived at the courthouse, the building was already buzzing. Closing arguments were scheduled for the afternoon. By tomorrow, a verdict would likely be reached. Isaiah pushed his cart down the familiar halls, but his steps felt different now. Slower, more deliberate, as if each movement carried weight. He cleaned the courtroom one last time before it filled. The witness stand stood empty, polished, waiting. Isaiah stopped in front of it longer than usual. He rested both hands on the railing, feeling the cool wood beneath his palms. He imagined himself there, facing the jury, facing the same eyes that had dismissed him for years. He imagined the questions. Why didn't you come forward sooner? What makes you think you saw it clearly? Who are you to challenge this story? The doubt crept in, sharp and familiar. He knew exactly how this could go. He could lose his job. He could be mocked. He could be ignored. Worse, he could be punished for stepping out of the place people had assigned him. Men like Isaiah didn't disrupt courtrooms. They cleaned them. By late morning, the trial recessed briefly. Lawyers clustered in the hallway. Jurors stretched their legs. Isaiah stood near the water fountain, pretending to focus on wiping fingerprints from the metal surface. The bailiff walked past. Isaiah felt his pulse quicken. This was it. Or it wasn't. He could still stay quiet, still disappear back into the background where it was safer. "Sir," Isaiah said quietly. The bailiff stopped and turned, clearly surprised that the janitor was addressing him. "Yeah?" Isaiah swallowed. His mouth felt dry. "I need to report something," he said. "About the night of the shooting." The bailiff studied him for a moment, confusion flickering across his face. "Report what?" "I was there," Isaiah replied. His voice was calm, but inside, everything shook. "I was across the street. I saw what happened." For a second, the hallway noise seemed to fade. The bailiff's expression shifted, from confusion to skepticism. "You're saying you witnessed the incident?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Why are you only saying this now?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. He glanced around the hallway, at the people in suits, the power, the certainty. Then he looked back at the bailiff. "Because no one ever asked me," he said simply. Within minutes, everything unraveled. The bailiff alerted the judge. The attorneys were summoned. Isaiah was escorted into a small conference room, his heart pounding louder with every step. The prosecutor's eyes lit up with cautious interest. The defense attorney's face hardened immediately. "A janitor?" the defense lawyer said, barely disguising the disdain in his voice. "You're telling me the court overlooked a janitor eyewitness?" Isaiah sat quietly, hands folded in his lap. "I clean this building," he said. "I don't make decisions in it. That's your job." The prosecutor asked him to recount what he saw. Isaiah did so carefully, precisely, sticking to facts. No emotion, no exaggeration. Just the truth as it had unfolded under the streetlight that night. The room grew silent as he spoke. When he finished, the defense attorney leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Convenient," he said. "Very convenient timing." Isaiah met his gaze. "What's convenient," Isaiah replied, his voice steady, "is ignoring people until the truth becomes inconvenient." There was a pause. The judge ordered a recess to consider whether Isaiah's testimony would be allowed. Isaiah was asked to wait in a side room, alone again. He sat there staring at the floor, his leg bouncing uncontrollably now that the moment had passed. Doubt flooded in. Had he done the right thing? Had he waited too long? Was this bravery or foolishness? The door finally opened. "The judge will allow your testimony," the bailiff said. "You'll take the stand." Isaiah closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, he stood. The courtroom was packed when Isaiah walked in. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as he took the stand. Some people squinted, confused. Others smiled faintly, amused. The defense attorney smirked. Isaiah raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. As he sat down, he felt every pair of eyes on him, eyes that had never truly seen him before. And for the first time in his life, Isaiah Coleman was no longer cleaning up after justice. He was about to confront it.